It's been quite fun working through Kyle Thompson's games this last year. As of time of writing today's review, his second game, Islets, completes the set, though his next game, Well Dweller, is tantalisingly close to release. Interestingly, despite the success of Crypt Custodian, Islets clearly remains a deeply enjoyed game among fans of Metroidvanias, and indeed when I mentioned to some friends that I was exploring the genre for the blog, it was brought up more than once as a game I'd probably enjoy. While Sheepo might not have been quite my tempo, this game promised a more combat-oriented experience with heavier bullet hell elements, and it's safe to say that it delivers. You're listening to the almighty Backlog. I'm Ellie, and today's review is on Islets, available at time of writing for PC, PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, Switch, Xbox One and Xbox Series XS. This review is based on the PC version. Originally released in August of 2022, developed by Kyle Thompson and published by Arma Game Studios. It's a Metroidvania game, and How Long to Beat has an average playtime of about 9 hours. Islets' intro immediately sets itself up in my favour when it reveals that the titular islets in question are actually floating fragments of a sky island, left shattered and hanging in the air by events in the game's past. For what it's worth, I happen to think floating islands are maybe one of the coolest locations to introduce into a fantasy setting, so a whole game on them suits me just fine. Aside from anything, I also think that they're a really good idea for a Metroidvania, since they kind of let you pre-build separate explorable areas. Of course, part of any good Metroidvania is in finding ways to link all the disparate parts of the world together, so that your exploration can cross through them all and let you show off your mastery of the game's tricks. Islets understands that, which is why the plot is all about finding long-hidden giant magnetic cores embedded in each floating island and activating them in order to bring the once shattered continent back together. Our hero for this adventure is Ico, a small grey mouse who, like many others, finds himself drawn to this place in search of the renown that will come from being the hero who rejoins the islands. He arrives on the verdant grasslands of Northstable, armed with little more than a sword, and sets off to explore, delving through the myriad challenges left there and defeating the enemies that make the island their home. He's not alone in this. The islands have plenty of would-be heroes traipsing around, from the insufferable rival Snoot to the plucky Greybird. In fact, in general, this title represents a huge leap forward for Thomas's writing. There are more characters with distinct voices than in Sheepo for a start, but there's also actual progressional writing as characters change and grow across the course of your adventure. It's not long before you reach an impasse in your exploration of the first island. As is the wont of the genre, as you head in a direction, eventually you'll find that you lack some vital platforming upgrade necessary to making any more headway. Occasionally with Islets, that roadblock is somewhat more literal, as, well, you're on a fragment of a floating continent, and that means sometimes you'll simply run into bridges that hang off into the void, remnants of the fault lines that split the continent apart in the first place. The one way off the starting islet itself is by air, and so Ico is given a rudimentary skyship early on in the game. This opens up Islet's secondary exploration, the open sky. We are on floating islands, after all, so Ico needs to be able to take to the skies in order to find the other islets and explore them. As you ascend into the clouds and move away from Northstable, you'll swiftly come across a thriving town in the skies above. This was the first bit of that excellent environmental storytelling I crave so much in Metroidvanias. That Ico's adventure is by no means unique, and that in fact so many attempts have been made before that an entire industry has sprung up to support other budding aerial adventurers. Now, obviously most of the things that you can interact with here are the kinds of typical merchants one finds in video games. You've got vendors who sell passive boosts and strength upgrades, a health clinic for you to respawn at should you bite it, a place to buy new arms and armour for your ship, and a chap who sells you hints on where to go next. But because the game is about a long-standing string of adventuring types who try and fail to restore the islands, it makes a lot of in-universe sense that an economy has been built around that. The majority of the game, however, is spent on the ground, trekking around the islands and doing the usual Metroidvania things, finding secrets, learning new movement skills, and beating up nasty boss monsters. At the most fundamental level, basically everything in Islets represents a phenomenal step forward from Sheepo. It's clear that Thompson understood precisely the lessons to be learned from his first game, which is both wonderful to see in a developer and also has resulted in a game I honestly found to be an utter joy to play. I think part of what makes Thompson's games so fun is that he obviously has a great knack for when things are going to be best served through simplicity, rather than overcomplicating. The combat in Islets, for example, is extremely basic. Aiko has a little sword with which they can thrust and attack forwards, and this can be done with surprising levels of speed. Nevertheless, there's a very clear, short cooldown between attacks where you're vulnerable. Along the way, Aiko's repertoire of melee attacks extends only a small amount, with things like a crashing aerial downwards move. As a contrast to that, Aiko's enemies increasingly jump in complexity. Thompson's games have a penchant for incorporating bullet hell elements, and of the three, Islets is maybe the most direct in it. Enemies spew out blasts in learnable patterns just begging to be dodged through or leapt over, and of course the bosses are particularly notable for their swirling patterns of bullets. If I were to be picky, I'd say that Aiko's damage output could be a little higher. It's one thing to enjoy learning attack patterns, but it's another to feel like you're having to demonstrate that knowledge over and over while you chip away at boss health bars. This feels less apparent, however, during the bosses you face in your airship, which let Thompson fully involve his Danmaku fandom. Exploration is smooth and zippy. I've talked before that part of what makes a Metroidvania live or die is the efficacy of traversal, and I think Islets is Thompson's most satisfying in that regard. The basics are here, in that Aiko has access to a decent dodge roll, with precious iframes you'll need to get good with knowing for survival against the onslaught of enemies. While there's no air dash, there's a contextual replacement as Aiko can combo attack off glowing white points that hang in the air to string together long rounds of jumps, which feels like a reworked leftover from Shippo, but here it enables brilliantly quick movement around the zones. As you progress through Islets, you'll earn upgrade points for Aiko, both through combat and exploration. The ones gained in combat were a bit of a mystery to me for much of my playthrough. I think they're tied to numbers of enemies killed, but most of the time it felt like they were popping for me at random. The ones found hidden around the map made a lot more sense. The in-game map is fairly clear when it comes to showing you where you've not yet been, and as per usual for a Metroidvania, once you get a new movement power, you obviously want to backtrack everywhere and see where you can now reach. The big game changers for this are the ability to teleport between save points and the wall climb, which is maybe one of the nippiest examples of its kind I've ever seen in a game. There's something deeply hilarious about the speed at which Aiko ascends walls, like he's a rat on an overclocked escalator. And it's this that really elevates Islets over its predecessors, and perhaps even over Crypt Custodian, its successor, for me. The fluidity of both its movement and combat is exceptional. You never feel like you're not in perfect control of Aiko. Despite the developers' love of bullet hell mechanics and design, I don't think the game's level of challenge ever really gets to be too much. You've enough health that the game feels forgiving, and gives you ample opportunity to learn patterns and figure out a way to avoid them. It's an exceptional balance, while also managing to cram an entire multi-area Metroidvania into less than 10 hours of play. I'd quite happily place Islets next to games like Haiku the Robot as a fantastic entry point for the genre. The final score is 6 out of 7, excellent. Games with a touch of brilliance. It might only just miss out on being a favourite, but you should definitely play this. This has been Ellie on the Almighty Backlog. You can support this project by reading the review over on thealmightybacklog.wordpress.com, or by listening to the pod review hosted on RSS and YouTube. Please feel free to follow me over on Mastodon, Blue Sky and or Backlogged by following the links on the website. If you'd like to support the show financially, you can do so by donating via PayPal to thealmightybacklog@gmail.com, or by hitting the donate button on the blog. Thank you for listening, and have a lovely day.